Around 3,000 years ago, on a small volcanic island in the northern Aegean, every man went to sleep with no idea it was the last time. By the next sunrise, the women of Lemnos had killed all of them: husbands, fathers, brothers, baby boys, the whole male population, gone in a single night. And here's the part that should really keep you up. The ancient Greeks didn't tell this story as a warning. They told it as an origin story. This is how one of the most famous islands in myth got its reputation, its queen, and a proverb that Greeks used for centuries whenever they wanted to describe pure, unforgivable horror. So let's talk about Lemnos, the island that men learned to be afraid of. One island, zero men. Lemnos is a real place. You can fly there today, eat some grilled octopus, and enjoy the beaches without a single murder happening. It sits in the northeastern Aegean, closer to modern Turkey than to mainland Greece, and it's been inhabited for thousands of years. In myth, though, Lemnos was special for a darker reason. It was the one Greek island where, for a stretch of time, there were no men at all. Not because of a plague, not because of a war with outsiders. The women did it themselves, on purpose, on one coordinated evening. And what makes the story land is that the Greeks who told it weren't horrified by the women being capable of violence. They were horrified because the violence was aimed at their own families. To understand how a whole island of women decided to commit the same crime on the same night, you have to start with a very petty, very powerful goddess who felt disrespected: the Island of Fire. First, a quick tour, because the island itself matters. Lemnos was volcanic, and one of its old names was Athaleia, which basically means smoky or fiery. The Greeks loved a good volcanic island because they had a god who needed one. That god was Hephaestus, the blacksmith of the gods, the guy who forged Zeus's lightning bolts and Achilles' armor. According to the Iliad, when Zeus got fed up with him and threw him off Mount Olympus, Hephaestus crash-landed on exactly one spot: Lemnos. The locals nursed him back to health, and the island became his sacred home, his forge, his fire, his people. So Lemnos was already a place of smoke and flame and metalworking gods before any of the murder business started. Keep that fire in the back of your mind, because much later, some very clever scholars are going to argue that the fire is the secret key to the whole grisly story. For now, just know that this island ran on flame, and its patron god was famous for one very relevant thing. His wife cheated on him constantly. His wife was Aphrodite. That's going to matter a lot. A goddess gets petty. Aphrodite, goddess of love, was married to Hephaestus, and she was not exactly faithful. Her most famous fling was with Ares, the god of war, which is its own soap opera. But that's not the crime that dooms Lemnos. The crime is much smaller and much dumber. The women of Lemnos, for reasons the sources never fully explain, stopped honoring Aphrodite. They neglected her worship. No sacrifices, no festivals, no respect. And if you've spent any time with Greek mythology, you already know that neglecting a deity is the single fastest way to ruin your entire bloodline. These gods did not do, "we'll agree to disagree." They did divine vengeance, and they did it with flair. Aphrodite's revenge here is genuinely one of the pettiest curses in all of myth. She didn't send a monster. She didn't sink the island. She went for something far more personal and far more humiliating. According to Apollodorus, who wrote the tidy textbook version of this myth, Aphrodite visited them with a noisome smell. That's the polite translation. The Greek word is dysosmia, and it means, bluntly, that Aphrodite cursed every woman on Lemnos to stink. Not a little. A repulsive, unbearable, clear-the-room stench. And here's the cruel genius of it. This is the goddess of love and desire, making the women physically undesirable to their own husbands. The men of Lemnos, faced with wives they could no longer stand to be near, did the coward's move. They pulled away. They stopped sharing their wives' beds. A curse about smell was really a curse about being rejected and replaced, which cuts a lot deeper than an odor ever could. Now, some ancient writers weren't satisfied with a goddess made them smelly, because even by mythology standards, that's a stretch. A historian named Mercilus of Methymna offered a rationalizing spin. Maybe the women smelled because of a plant, specifically the chaste tree, a shrub the Greeks associated with a ritual of temporary abstinence, where women deliberately kept away from men for a while. File that under "sounds boring now" becomes fascinating in about 8 minutes, because that plant is a real clue. Enter the Thracian women. So the men of Lemnos have wives they won't touch. What do a bunch of ancient warriors do about that? They go shopping for replacements, obviously. The men sailed to nearby Thrace, on the mainland, and either raided or waged an actual war, depending on which poet you trust. Statius, who gives us the most dramatic version, describes a full military expedition. Either way, the men came home with captive Thracian women, and they brought these women right into their households as concubines, in front of their wives, as if their wives weren't already furious about being abandoned. Run through it from the Lemnian women's side. First, their goddess curses them. Then their husbands reject them for the crime of being cursed. Then those same husbands sail off, fight a war, and return dragging home younger foreign women to take their place in their own homes. The wives have been humiliated at every single level. By a god, by their spouses, and now by strangers sleeping in their beds. The men thought they'd solved their problem. They had, in fact, just built the conditions for their own extinction. And notice what the men never once considered doing: apologizing, or making things right with the goddess, or simply treating their wives with a scrap of respect. Every man on the island looked at a bad situation and decided the solution was to double down and rub it in. That collective failure of imagination is, in a way, the real cause of everything that follows. The curse lit the fuse. The men built the bomb. One night, the women of Lemnos did not file for divorce. They organized. In Statius's version, the ringleader is an older woman named Polyxo, who works herself into a frenzy and rallies the others with a speech. And her big argument is a historical one. She reminds them that they wouldn't even be the first women in Greek myth to do this. There was a king named Danaus, whose 50 daughters were forced to marry their 50 cousins, and on the wedding night, 49 of those brides stabbed their new husbands to death. If the daughters of Danaus could hand out knives at a wedding, Polyxo argues, the wronged women of Lemnos can certainly return the favor to men who actually deserve it. Nothing motivates a crowd, quite like being told the horrifying thing they're about to do has a respectable precedent. The plan was total. Not kill the husbands who wronged us, but every male on the island. The men who went to Thrace, the ones who stayed home, fathers, brothers, and, in the most disturbing version, even the male infants and little boys. Statius has the women agree, in cold blood, to spare no one who could grow up to take revenge or carry the family line forward. It's methodical in a way that's honestly scarier than a fit of rage. Statius, writing his epic, the Thebaid, gives the massacre in first person through the queen herself, and the details are gruesome. The men come home from Thrace. There's a feast, wine flows, torches burn, everyone lies down among the couches and garlands, fat and happy and unaware. And then the women move. He names the victims one by one. A woman named Gorge stabs a man in the back as he reclines. Foster brothers with long, unshorn hair get cut down. One woman kills her own betrothed. A boy called Epopeus is stabbed by his own mother while he plays among the party cushions. Another woman walks through the carnage carrying her father's severed head, its mouth still moving. By morning, the feast hall is a slaughterhouse. Overturned wine bowls, bodies slumped against the couches they'd been drinking on, sword hilts standing straight up out of chests. The entire adult and infant male population of an island, wiped out between one sunset and the next. This is the deed. This is why anyone remembered Lemnos at all. And there was exactly one man left breathing, because one woman couldn't go through with it. The daughter who cheated. The king of Lemnos was a man named Thoas, and his daughter was the princess Hypsipyle. When the killing started, Hypsipyle made a choice that would define the rest of her very unlucky life. She refused to kill her father. How she saved him depends on who's telling it, and the versions are all fantastic. Apollonius of Rhodes, the poet who wrote the Argonaut epic, says she hid Thoas, and then set him adrift at sea inside a hollow wooden chest, floating him off to safety on another island. Statius makes it a whole ghost-guided escape, with the spirit of her ancestor Dionysus lighting the path with a trail of flame while she smuggles her father through the city walls to a waiting boat. A Roman poet named Valerius Flaccus has the best version of all. Hypsipyle disguises her father as a statue of the god Dionysus, and literally parades him out of the city in plain sight, because who's going to search a religious icon? The sources even disagree on where Thoas washed up. One says an island later called Sicinus. One says he made it to his brother on Chios. Another sends him all the way to the land of the Taurians. Pick your favorite. The point is the same in all of them. One princess loved her father too much to murder him, so she smuggled him off the island and then lied to everyone about it. And to sell the lie, she faked his death. She burned his royal weapons and clothes, so the other women would believe old King Thoas had been killed with the rest. As far as the island knew, Hypsipyle had murdered right alongside the rest of them. She hadn't. That secret is a ticking clock, and it's going to go off later. So now Lemnos is an island of women. Just women. They've done the thing, and the immediate problem, the humiliation and the rage, is solved. But a much bigger problem shows up almost instantly. It turns out running a society is complicated when you've eliminated roughly half of it in one night. Statius describes the aftermath as grim and haunted. The women are exhausted, sorrowful, and powerless. There's no next generation coming. No sons, no future. They've won, and winning feels like standing in a graveyard they built themselves. Hypsipyle, being the daughter of the dead king, gets made queen of this man-free kingdom, which is a bit awkward given that she's secretly the one woman who didn't earn her spot. For years, that's the situation. An island of murderers with no men, no heirs, and a whole lot of unspoken guilt, waiting for something to happen. And in Greek mythology, when a group of women is stranded on an island with no men and a fully staffed guilt complex, you can set your watch by what happens next. A boat shows up, then a boat showed up. The boat was the Argo. On board were the Argonauts, the single most stacked hero roster in all of Greek myth. Jason, leading the quest for the Golden Fleece. Heracles, the strongest man alive. A crew of demigods and champions, rowing through the Aegean, in need of a rest stop. When the women of Lemnos saw an armed ship approaching, their first reaction was pure PTSD. They grabbed weapons and lined the walls, convinced their old enemies the Thracians had come for revenge. An island full of women who had recently proven they'd kill an entire population overnight, now armed and expecting a fight. The Argonauts nearly rode straight into a buzzsaw, but cooler heads prevailed, and here the story pivots hard. An older woman named Polyxo stands up in the assembly and makes the practical case. The island needs men, not for love, but for survival. Without a new generation, Lemnos dies out and can't even defend itself. So instead of fighting the heroes, why not welcome them? The women agree. The Argonauts are invited in, and let's just say the crew of the Argo was extremely willing to help repopulate the island. Pindar, writing back in 462 BC, even says the heroes competed in athletic games there, and won robes woven by the Lemnian women as prizes. There's a dark comedy to this whole sequence that the Greeks clearly enjoyed. The most dangerous women in mythology, women who had proven they would butcher an entire island rather than be disrespected, are talked out of violence by a sales pitch about long-term population planning. And the Argonauts, a boatload of the greatest warriors of the age, never even find out how close they came to being victims number several hundred and one. They think they've stumbled onto a lonely island of welcoming women. They have no idea they're standing in a crime scene, being served drinks by the culprits. Hypsipyle herself paired off with Jason and had twin sons by him. One of them, Euneus, actually matters later. Then Heracles, who'd stayed grumpily with the ship the whole time, got fed up with his crewmates playing house and shamed them all back onto the Argo to go finish the quest. The heroes sailed off. The women were left, once again, holding babies and waving at the horizon. The byword for horror. Here's where the story stops being just a wild myth and becomes a fixed idea in the Greek mind. The massacre on Lemnos was so infamous that Lemnian deeds turned into a proverb. Whenever a Greek wanted to describe an act of cruelty so extreme it was almost beyond words, they'd call it a Lemnian deed. The playwright Aeschylus ranked the Lemnian crime as first among evils, the gold standard of atrocity. But the historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, adds a twist that makes the whole thing darker and stranger. He says the proverb actually covers two separate Lemnian horrors. The first is the one we've been talking about, women killing their men. The second happened later, and this time the genders were flipped. According to Herodotus, a non-Greek people called the Pelasgians settled Lemnos, and they kidnapped a group of Athenian women, hauling them back to the island as concubines. Those women had sons and raised them to speak Greek and act Athenian. The Pelasgian men, watching these half-Athenian boys grow bolder and start dominating their own kids, got scared of what they'd become as grown men. So the men murdered both the Athenian women and their half-Athenian sons on the same island, and Herodotus flatly says it's because of both of these deeds, the women's and the men's, that Lemnian deeds became a byword throughout Greece for any act of savagery. One island, two massacres, everyone gets a turn. That symmetry is worth sitting with, because it changes how the first story reads. The Greeks who invented this myth were almost all men, and you might expect them to tell it as a simple lesson about how dangerous women are when you give them an inch. But the way the story is actually built, every step of the women's rage is a direct response to something that was done to them. They were cursed, then rejected, then publicly replaced by captives their own husbands dragged home. Modern scholars point out that the massacre, as horrifying as it is framed as a revolt by women who had been discarded and told they no longer mattered. The men of Lemnos treated their wives as disposable. The myth's grim punchline is that the wives disagreed, in the most permanent way available to them. The magic dirt. Before we get to what the myth might really mean, you need to understand just how genuinely strange the real island of Lemnos was, because it had a reputation for weird sacred stuff that has nothing to do with murder. Lemnos was home to one of the most famous medicines of the ancient world, a reddish clay called Lemnian earth. People believed this specific dirt could cure poisonings, snake bites, dysentery, and infected wounds. It was so trusted that it was still being used as a medicine into the 1800s. And it wasn't just scooped up whenever. The clay was dug on exactly one designated day per year, before dawn, in a full religious ceremony run by a priestess of Artemis, at the very spot where Hephaestus was said to have crashed to Earth. They pressed it into little tablets and stamped each one with an official seal, which is where we get the term sealed earth. This stuff was so respected that the Greek doctor Galen, one of the most important physicians in all of history, personally sailed to Lemnos in 167 AD, just to watch them harvest it. So this is the picture. A volcanic island, sacred to the god of fire, that ran a once-a-year sunrise ritual overseen by a priestess to dig up holy healing mud. Lemnos genuinely was a place where strange annual ceremonies were baked into daily life. Hold that thought, because it's about to explain the entire murder story. What was really happening? Now for the twist that history nerds love. A lot of modern scholars think this entire myth is a distorted memory of a real religious ritual, and the clues are hiding in plain sight. Here's the setup. On the actual island of Lemnos, there was a genuine annual festival. Once a year, every single fire on the whole island was put out, and kept out for 9 days. No cooking fire, no hearth, no forge, nothing. For 9 days, Lemnos went cold and dark. Then a sacred ship sailed to Delos, the island of the sun god Apollo, and came back carrying new, pure fire, which was used to relight every hearth on the island. Life restarted. A famous scholar named Walter Burkert argued in 1970 that the myth is basically the story version of that ritual, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Those 9 fireless days were a time of suspended, abnormal life. The normal order collapses. The sexes separate. Marriage stops. Society symbolically dies. In the myth, that's the massacre. The period when the men are gone and the island is barren and frozen. Then the new fire arrives from Delos, and normal life returns. In the myth, that's the Argonauts showing up to relight the island by giving it a new generation. The murder isn't celebrating murder. It's a mythic dramatization of the world ending and being reborn. And remember that boring plant from earlier? The chaste tree tied to rituals of women keeping away from men? That's the same idea. A real custom where women temporarily withdrew from their husbands, exaggerated over centuries into a story where the women withdrew permanently, with knives. The stink, the rejection, the man-free island, they may all be echoes of a real festival where, for a few days each year, the women of Lemnos genuinely lived apart. History turned a religious pause button into a horror movie. It gets better, because the fire festival was tied to a genuine mystery cult on the island. Lemnos was a major center for the worship of the Kaberoi, a set of shadowy smith gods connected to Hephaestus, with their own secret sanctuary and their own initiation rites that outsiders weren't allowed to know about. Whatever happened during those 9 dark, fireless days, it was serious religious business, not a random local quirk. The ancient Greek at Delphi could have told you Lemnos was famous for exactly 2 things: sacred fire and sacred secrets. A story about a night when everything went dark and terrible before new life arrived by ship fits that island's spiritual calendar almost too perfectly. One more layer, because the archaeology backs up part of this. Lemnos really was home to a non-Greek people before the Athenians took it over around 500 BC under a general named Miltiades. We even have a stone inscription, the Lemnos Stele, written in a mysterious pre-Greek language that looks related to Etruscan. So the island genuinely had its own strange, foreign population, its own gods, and its own rituals that the mainland Greeks found exotic and a little unsettling. Some of Lemnos's ancient towns, like Polyokni, are among the oldest settlements in all of Europe. When Greeks told scary stories about that island, they were dressing up a real place that already felt like the edge of the map. Hypsipyle's terrible luck. Remember Hypsipyle's secret, the fact that she never actually killed her father? It comes back to wreck her. Eventually, the other women found out that Thoas had survived, that their queen had cheated the pact and kept her hands clean. They were furious, and Hypsipyle had to run for her life from the very island she supposedly ruled. Her luck did not improve. She fled, got seized by pirates, and was sold into slavery. She ended up far from home in a place called Nemea, working as a nursemaid for the infant son of the local king, a baby named Opheltes. And then, in the single most Greek mythology thing imaginable, disaster found her again. A group of warriors, the 7 marching against Thebes, came through desperate for water. Hypsipyle set the baby down for one moment on a bed of wild celery to show them a spring, and a serpent killed the child. The seer with the army renamed the dead baby Archemeris, meaning the beginning of doom, and to honor him the warriors founded funeral games. Those became the Nemean Games, one of the 4 great athletic festivals of ancient Greece, with a victory crown made of that same wild celery. So, a princess who spared one life on Lemnos ended up, through slavery and one unlucky serpent, accidentally helping to found a pan-Hellenic sporting event. That's the kind of luck Hypsipyle had. She did the one merciful thing in a story full of murder, and the universe spent the rest of her life billing her for it. There is a small happy ending, if you squint. Euripides wrote a whole play about her later years, and in it, her twin sons, now grown men out searching for the mother they'd been separated from, arrive at Nemea at exactly the right moment. Mother and sons recognize each other through tokens, swords stamped with the mark of the Argo, and the reunion saves Hypsipyle's life, just as the grieving queen of Nemea is about to have her killed for letting the baby die. After everything, she got her boys back. And those boys did fine. Euneus, the twin she had with Jason, grew up to be king of Lemnos, and by the time of the Iliad he shows up as a wine merchant, shipping wine from the island to the Greek army camped outside Troy. Homer says the Greeks paid for it in bronze, iron, cattle hides, and even slaves. At one point, Euneus buys a captured Trojan prince from Achilles' brother in exchange for a fancy silver mixing bowl. His descendants in Athens supposedly became a clan of professional musicians, so the island that murdered its entire male population in one night produced, 2 generations later, a wine-dealing king and a family of harp players. Greek myth does not do tidy morals, but it absolutely does long, weird payoffs. Lemnos moved on. The beaches are lovely now, the octopus is excellent, and the volcanoes are extinct. Just, if you visit, maybe don't skip Aphrodite's birthday party.